She believed she was destined to occupy a station far above the everyday concerns of lesser beings, and that certainty of her own superiority had only grown stronger during her voyage across the stars. Aria Velasquez carried herself with quiet arrogance from the moment she stepped off the shuttle at Silver Dawn Station. She was Valorian, after all, tall, elegant, and possessed of an otherworldly sheen to her skin that caught the overhead lights in subtle glints of silver. Valorians were known for their advanced biology, their psychic sensitivity, and above all, their unshakable belief that they were the pinnacle of galactic evolution. She had come to Silver Dawn Station to participate in a specialized training program mandated by the Galactic Alliance. It was a station known for conducting joint operations among different races: human, Valorian, Sidori, and several others. The effort was meant to foster cooperation against outside threats, specifically marauding groups like the Corvian Raiders who had been plundering resource outposts and research facilities. Aria considered it something of an insult that the Valorian Council would order her to such a place, to study and train alongside species she deemed less refined and less powerful, yet duty to her clan could not be denied. She drifted through the main corridor with its pale metal walls and floor panels that hummed with the low throb of the station's power generator. Her posture was perfectly erect, one gloved hand gripping the strap of a small pack slung over her shoulder. She wore a uniform that matched the overall style used by interspecies trainees: slim-fitting trousers, a form-hugging jacket, yet she'd modified it slightly to reflect Valorian aesthetics. Unlike most arrivals, she did not glance around in wonder or confusion. Her silver eyes were still, cold, surveying the environment as if preparing for an appraisal she would likely find wanting. The woman at the reception desk, a short, broad-shouldered Sidori, began to greet Aria in the standardized diplomatic language. Aria simply lifted a hand, made a curt gesture, then spoke in flawless Basic. "I have my assignment orders." A quick blink of the Sidori's large, dark eyes betrayed her surprise, but she nodded politely, processed the data from Aria's ID chip, then directed her to the orientation hall. As Aria departed, the Sidori watch officer murmured something about another Valorian aristocrat under her breath, exactly the sort of remark Aria expected. None of these fleeting observations mattered enough to disrupt Aria's composure. She had not come for friendships or alliances. She was here for the mandatory completion of an interspecies training program, after which she would return home to the applause of her own kind. She believed the entire arrangement a formality. That assumption wavered only slightly when she passed one of the station's mechanical bays. The heavy door was open, a swirl of tools and equipment spread across the deck, and sparks arced in the air as a human knelt to fix a malfunctioning conduit. Dark hair fell across his forehead and his uniform jacket was stripped off and tossed aside, leaving him in a simple black undershirt. He seemed oblivious to the lively shower of sparks that occasionally erupted from the cable he was splicing. A second or two passed before he noticed her presence and paused, blinking once or twice. Aria recognized his species immediately, a human with broad shoulders and a certain grounded air about him. He had a calm, self-assured expression. Their eyes met, hers metallic silver, his a subdued gray. Before she could decide whether to speak, he gave a quick, polite nod, then turned back to his work. She did not bother to respond. Consciously or not, she elevated her chin and walked on, expecting him to watch her go. If he did, she never confirmed it. She told herself she did not care. The entire encounter was not worth more than a dismissive thought. After all, humans were everywhere these days, scuttling around the galaxy like persistent insects. Yet something about the moment left a lingering spark in her mind, as if she had encountered a presence that did not fully submit to her lofty status. That was enough to place a tiny barb of irritation under her otherwise impenetrable self-assurance. She continued to the orientation hall, where the day's training rosters were displayed on floating holoscreens. Within minutes she found her name, Aria Velasquez, Valorian, assigned to Training Group 17, under the supervision of Lieutenant Lucas Hayes, human. The very notion made her lips curl in momentary disdain. A human was to be her supervisor. She closed her eyes, inhaled, then calmly walked toward the designated meeting area. In the days that followed, Arya made her initial impressions on the rest of the group. She was aloof, rarely engaging in casual talk, completing each scheduled briefing with a clinical efficiency. At times she would answer a direct question with icy brevity, then drift away without further comment. Only a handful of trainees were bold enough to approach her more than once. It was around midday on the second day of station protocol when she encountered Lucas Hayes officially. She recognized him at once as the man from the mechanical bay. He wore a standard instructor's jacket with the Galactic Alliance emblem on one shoulder, a set of silver chevrons on his left sleeve. A holographic datapad hovered in front of him, listing the group's progress. He called out instructions to a pair of cadets adjusting external sensor relays, then turned to greet Arya. "I'm Lieutenant Hayes," he said, voice low and even. "I see you've been briefed on the schedule for the field exercise." She examined him wordlessly for a second or two. Now that she saw him in a more official capacity, she noted the tension in the set of his shoulders, the subtle lines of old scars visible across his knuckles. He looked more seasoned than the typical humans she had come across, yet still, he was simply that. A human. "Yes," she answered. "I have reviewed the mission parameters. I suppose we should begin." He tapped the datapad, then paused, eyes flicking across the details. "It'll be a 6-person operation, traveling down to the planet's surface to gather meteorological data. You'll handle the advanced scanning equipment, if you're comfortable with that." She let out a small sniff. "I am fully capable." His expression stayed neutral. "Great. We're leaving at 1300. Until then, you might want to run the diagnostic routines on the sensor array. The Valorians have the highest compatibility with these systems, so your help is appreciated." Her gaze turned slightly colder, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, I will see to it." She pivoted on one heel and left without waiting for further instructions. There was no overt challenge in his tone, no blatant insult or condescension, yet something in the straightforward, calm manner of his speech nettled her. She was used to people either fawning over her or turning away in intimidation. This man simply regarded her as an equal part of a mission team. Her very posture as she walked away indicated a rising tension in her spine. A few hours later, she and 5 other trainees, including 2 humans, 1 Sidorian and a reptilian Rylix, boarded the small shuttle bound for the planet below. Lucas Hayes piloted, his hands steady on the control sticks as the craft descended through swirling golden-brown clouds. Turbulence battered the hull, but Hayes guided them with practiced ease, glancing at the environmental readouts and adjusting thrusters to compensate. Arya watched him in silence from her seat behind the cockpit. Though she despised small talk, she could not help noticing the way his gaze occasionally flicked to the monitors for the hardware she had tested. He was verifying her work. She felt a stab of annoyance, but also an odd tingle of satisfaction to see her calibration was perfect. The planet's surface was harsh, a rocky wasteland with deep canyons carved by centuries of raging storms. The outpost they landed at was little more than a prefab structure pressed against the base of an enormous cliff. Once they touched down, Hayes organized the group, confirming that each person knew their objective. They were to trek across a narrow canyon path, set up scanning devices, and gather data on the electromagnetic flux for about 2 hours before returning. Arya took point. She had no intention of trudging behind the lesser creatures. Her Valorian physiology gave her heightened reflexes, sharper senses. There was no reason she should not be at the forefront. The only person who attempted to caution her was Hayes himself. "Velasis," he called, striding forward. "We need to proceed carefully. The path's not stable, and the storm watchers reported sudden bursts of toxic gas from some underground vents." She did not slow. "I will take note," she said, refusing to even look at him. They advanced as a team for a short while, with Arya maintaining a strong lead. The canyon walls rose on both sides, streaked with red and ochre. Jagged columns overhead creating an almost claustrophobic sense of being funneled deeper into the planet's innards. The wind whipped past, stirring up dust that clung to their boots. Arya occasionally paused to scan with a handheld device, murmuring updates into the communication link. Then it happened. She stepped near a crack in the ground from which a thin coil of grayish vapor hissed upward, an abrupt vent of pressurized gas. It struck her with surprising force, and though her reflexes were good, the edge of the ledge crumbled under her boots. Her arms flailed in an uncharacteristic moment of alarm, and the scanner tumbled from her hand. She might have saved herself, but it was dangerously close. Her foot slipped on loose stones. In the instant she realized she was about to plunge into the ravine, a strong grip seized her belt from behind and yanked her back onto solid ground. She spun, her breath catching, to find herself face to face with Lucas Hayes. He kept his hand fisted in her belt for one more second, ensuring she was steady on her feet. "Careful," he said, a note of emphasis on the word. Then he released her. "You okay?" Arya felt an immediate rush of outrage, overshadowed briefly by the recognition that yes, she had needed saving. She swallowed, forced her features into a mask of cold composure, and replied, "I had it under control." "You were about to fall," he pointed out calmly. "The composition of that gas. Once you're exposed, your reflexes go offline. Next time, wait until we can secure the path." Her cheeks warmed just a fraction. "I do not need a lesson in safety from a human." His gaze held hers unflinching. There was no immediate retort. He simply dipped his chin, stooped to pick up the scanner she had dropped, and placed it gently back in her hand. Then he said, "Let's keep moving." She could not quite find the words to respond in that moment. Part of her wanted to snap at him again, but something about his quiet confidence both grated on her nerves and left her strangely uncertain. She swallowed, turned away, and continued up the path with a more cautious stride. By the time they completed their scanning and returned to the prefab structure, she had spoken only a few curt phrases to him. The rest of the group gave them plenty of space, wise enough not to get between two strong personalities. Only the Sidorian, a bright-eyed female named Kiris, ventured a half-teasing remark about Arya's near plunge, which Arya responded to with a frosty glare. That evening, back at Silver Dawn Station, the group reconvened to upload the data. Hayes was at the console input, tapping in codes to relay the sensor logs to the station's mainframe. Arya lingered in the corner, arms folded, not wanting to appear too interested in the process. Yet she found herself oddly attentive to the way his posture seemed so self-possessed, the slight shift of his expression as he identified a glitch or confirmed a successful update. Finally, he noticed her presence, turned in his seat, and nodded. "Everything looks good," he said. "Your calibrations for the scanning device was spot on." She would have normally dismissed the compliment, but she found her tongue moving without quite realizing it. "I am, after all, quite adept at such tasks." He only smiled with a small tilt of his mouth. "I can see that." She refused to let him have the last word. "Next time, I will not require your assistance on the surface." His gray eyes locked onto hers. "If that's true, all the better." He let that sink in a moment. "Still, teamwork is the reason we're here. Might as well get used to it." Her lips tightened, and before she could respond, he turned back to the console. She left in silent frustration, returning to her assigned quarters. The entire encounter replayed in her mind with maddening clarity. She felt that spark of indignation once more. He was no ordinary human, at least in the sense that he did not bow or scrape. If anything, he seemed quietly unimpressed by her lineage. Somehow, that unsettled her more than open hostility would have. She disliked it almost as much as she disliked the memory of him hauling her back from the edge of the canyon floor. Over the following days, station operations ramped up. Rumors circulated that the Corvian raiding parties had been spotted in the sector. Although the station itself was well fortified, there were numerous old ruins and scattered archaeological sites on the planet below, each a tempting target for would-be looters seeking ancient technology. The training programs for all recruits intensified accordingly. Arya, being near the top of every demonstration, began to draw reluctant respect from some of the other recruits. She could accomplish tasks that required precise telekinetic control. scanning across frequencies that were almost undetectable to non-Valorian senses. She was also a formidable hand-to-hand combatant, utilizing the fluid, graceful combat styles taught only within the Valorian aristocracy. On more than one occasion, she left her sparring partners on the mat gasping while she stood with barely a bead of sweat. Yet her encounters with Hayes kept reminding her that not everyone was eager to worship her prowess. He often approached training with a methodical thoroughness that demanded she follow standard procedure. This led to friction. She found him scolding her for skipping safety checks or forging ahead alone. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad learned to give her space whenever the two of them locked horns over some mission detail. One afternoon, tension reached a boiling point. The group was scheduled for a second expedition to the planet's surface, this time to investigate a half-buried structure that might be part of a larger, older ruin. Arya believed she was well equipped to handle it alone, but Hayes insisted they travel as a unit. When she started to stride off again, he halted her, stepping in front of her path. The corridor was narrow, the overhead lights flickering in the station's typical mid-cycle dimming, simulating twilight. Her eyes narrowed as he lifted a hand, palm out, blocking her progress. "We go together, Velis," he said. She was about to push past him. She was Valorian, stronger than he was, certainly enough to brush aside his interference. But he stepped even closer, and when she tried to pivot around him, he spun her lightly and brought her back flush against the wall. Not violently, not in any injurious way, but with enough force that she found herself pinned. One of his arms braced near her shoulder, his body angled to keep her from slipping away. His gaze bored into hers, calm yet firm. "You're not leaving this station without the rest of the team. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the commander." She stood there, stunned for half a second. She had believed herself literally untouchable among these recruits, too intimidating for anyone to physically constrain. Yet here was a human, pinning her. The closeness of him, the heat radiating from his body, triggered a sudden, dizzying rush in her mind. "Release me," she said, the words more breathless than she would have liked. He did so, stepping back a fraction, but not enough to let her fully slip away. "Do you understand the orders or not?" Her pride flared, threatened to overshadow her logic. She drew in a sharp breath, arms tight at her sides. "You dare!" "I do," he answered, not raising his voice. "And if you act alone, you endanger the mission. I won't let that happen." She clenched her jaw so hard a muscle twitched. Despite her fury, she felt a twist of grudging respect for the nerve it took. She was used to being admired, fawned over, or avoided altogether. This was the first time in a long while that someone had confronted her so directly. "Fine," she managed, "but do not ever touch me that way again." He stared another beat, then nodded. "As long as you follow orders, we won't have a problem." She pushed off the wall, gliding away with her posture rigid. Part of her wanted to lash out physically, to knock him flat and show him exactly how strong a Valorian could be. Yet she knew it would jeopardize the entire training and reflect poorly on her aristocratic discipline. So she stalked down the corridor, ignoring the curious stares of the passing recruits, trying in vain to calm the conflicting swirl in her chest. That evening they set off together to the planet once more. This time the group was bigger, 8 trainees total plus Hayes. A storm system rolled across the sky, crackling with purple lightning as they made a tense descent into an open clearing. The target, a set of half-buried walls rumored to contain precursor artifacts, or at least fragments of ancient technology. The Valorians had long sought such relics to prove their rightful inheritance of the galaxy's past glories. The humans were more pragmatic, wanting to ensure the sites were catalogued, studied, or neutralized so advanced weaponry wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. Arya maintained a stony silence for much of the journey, though she obeyed instructions this time, staying with the group. Hayes occasionally sent her an inquisitive glance, but she refused to meet his gaze. The memory of him pinning her to the wall was burned into her mind, fueling her with a complicated mixture of anger and something else she didn't want to name. The site itself lay in a valley riddled with stone pillars jutting from the ground like petrified trees. The structure was partially collapsed, leaving an archway that opened into darkness. Arya used her scanning device to pick up faint energy signals emanating from within. That alone intrigued her enough to push aside her hostility for now. The group set up portable lights. Hayes insisted on pairs. No one was to wander alone into the deeper corridors. As they advanced, they found corridors lined with script that no one could decipher on sight. Arya's mental abilities picked up a sense of ancient power lingering behind the walls, something akin to the energy fields she had felt in old Valorian temples. She moved carefully, giving real-time updates to the rest of the squad. By some unspoken agreement, she and Hayes ended up exploring the central chamber together. Neither addressed the tension that crackled between them, but she noticed how he stayed within a few steps, ready to intervene if she rushed off again. Near the center of the ruin, Arya spotted a small pedestal with an intricate device resting atop it, some mechanism of crystal rods and metal coils. Light flickered along its surface when her footsteps drew near. She let out a soft exhalation, extending a hand to brush across the nearest coil. "Arya, wait," Hayes said, more quietly than usual, but with urgency. She paused, ignoring for a moment that he had used her given name. She sensed a faint hum from the device, but her curiosity overrode caution. She placed her palm on the coil. At once, a surge of warm energy pulsed outward, as if the structure had awakened from dormancy. The lights around them flickered, and a groan echoed through the stone hall, dust trickling from the ceiling. "What did you do?" Hayes asked, stepping to her side. "I'm not certain." Arya tried to remove her hand, but the coil seemed to cling to her, a static field of some sort. She felt her heart pound. "It's responding to me," she said. "Shut it down if you can," he urged. Before she could attempt that, the device fired a burst of pale light through the chamber, the shockwave rattling the walls. The entire ruin shook, and from overhead came a cascade of debris. Hayes pulled Arya backward just as a chunk of stone crashed in front of them. They nearly went sprawling, but he managed to brace them both against a half-broken pillar. She gasped, the device's energy dancing along her fingertips, making her nerves tingle. Then, as suddenly as it began, the surge subsided. Her hand was free. The ruin ceased trembling, though dust still hung in the air. She looked over at Hayes, who was breathing hard. For a moment their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them. She found herself murmuring, "Thank you." He nodded once, pressing a hand to his side. "We need to warn the others. Let's make sure we didn't just break the entire place." When they emerged, the rest of the squad was already reacting to the tremors. Cracks in the floor had formed, blocking one corridor, forcing half the group to take a detour. A deeper scan revealed there was significant instability in the ruin's substructure. They concluded that the device, now partially activated, had triggered a localized quake. The only choice was to get out or risk being buried under a collapse. They radioed for help, but the storm overhead hindered transmissions. Hayes organized a small makeshift rescue operation, while Arya led him back to the device to see if it could be disabled. Her telekinetic sensitivity allowed her to steady it, preventing further seismic waves. Meanwhile, he used his mechanical know-how to disconnect the primary power circuit, a delicate maneuver that almost ended in a second explosion. Still, together, they stabilized the mechanism. They ended up trapped for almost an hour in a side room when part of the corridor caved in behind them. The rest of the squad managed to escape out the main entrance, promising to return with excavation tools. So Arya and Hayes sat in silence, dust swirling through the beams of emergency lights. The rumble of thunder overhead seeped into the stone. Eventually, Hayes offered Arya a canteen of water. She hesitated, took it, sipped. Then, quietly, she said, "I didn't expect that, or any of this, truly." He gave a short, wry laugh. "Things rarely go as planned. That's what training is for." She shifted her posture. "I've always known my abilities exceeded what most can do. My clan believed that meant I must never accept assistance from outsiders, or it would lessen the Valorian image. I suppose that's why I can be difficult." He leaned back against a slab of collapsed rock. "I've worked with all kinds of people, The ones who claim they never need help are often the ones who need it most. Her eyes flashed with indignation, but it died quickly. You must think I'm an arrogant fool. No, he said, measuring his words. You're capable, that's obvious, but you push too hard because you think that's the only way you can stay on top. Out here, one misstep can kill you. What's more important, showing everyone you're invincible or keeping yourself and your squad alive? She let out a slow exhalation. You speak to me as if we are equals. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. We are. That's how the Alliance is supposed to work. And I've never been big on treating people like gods or insects. Her gaze drifted to the cracked floor. I see. She hesitated, as if sifting through her words. I was raised to believe humans are unremarkable. My mother always told me we should pity your species for lacking telepathic gifts or advanced biology. But I keep finding that none of you are as helpless as I imagined. He shrugged. We make do. We adapt. Sometimes that's enough. Silence stretched between them for a minute or so. She could feel the tension in the air, but it was no longer the friction that had characterized their earlier standoffs. It felt calmer, more intimate. She was hyper-aware of the lines of his face, the subtle scars on his arms, the fact that he had pinned her against a wall just days earlier, and how, in this moment, she didn't quite resent him for it. Eventually, the other trainees managed to break through the rubble, freeing them. After returning to the station, both Arya and Hayes faced questioning from the station's leadership. How had they activated the device, and was it salvageable? The final verdict was that no major harm had occurred, and they had stabilized it in time. Officially, their mission was considered a success, although it led to more interest in the old ruin from the station's archaeology division. In the days that followed, Arya found herself less combative with Hayes, though their interactions still crackled with underlying tension. She began to grudgingly admit to his competence in front of others, and while he maintained his calm, methodical approach, she occasionally sensed a flicker of amusement in his expression whenever she tried to deliver a cutting remark. Rumors of a looming Corvian attack intensified. Security protocols doubled. Patrol shifts were extended. Then, the dreaded day arrived. A scout drone picked up multiple Corvian ships dropping out of FTL near the outer edges of the sector. Silver Dawn station scanners alerted them to inbound hostiles. At first, the station's commanding officer believed they might strike the station directly, but the transmissions they intercepted suggested the Corvians were more interested in seizing ancient technology from the planet's surface. The half-buried ruin where Arya and Hayes had discovered the device had apparently drawn their attention. The entire site was at risk, so a small group was quickly deployed to protect or evacuate the archaeological team and possibly destroy the device if it couldn't be safeguarded. To no one's surprise, Arya and Hayes both ended up on that detail. This time their mission was not a mere training exercise, but a real operation. They landed during the tail end of a monstrous storm, forced to find cover in makeshift shelters. The archaeological team had dug deeper into the ruined sublevels, discovering catacombs brimming with metallic artifacts. It was precisely the sort of find that would drive the Corvians to mount a full-scale raid. The ground shook under lightning blasts as the squad regrouped around some partially collapsed walls. Arya, hair whipped by the wind, scanned the horizon, picking up trace energy signatures that indicated Corvian craft approaching. Hayes, standing beside her, was rigging a short-range comm beacon to send an SOS. The main signals were blocked by the storm's interference, leaving them reliant on ground-based systems. They're coming in from the west, she said, eyes narrowed. 5 vessels, just above the canyon line. He nodded, punching in a final command on the beacon. We've only got a few portable turrets. We can slow them down, but not for long. She looked back at him. Then we must ensure the device, and any other relics, do not fall into their hands. His jaw tightened. Agreed. The first wave of Corvian raiders swept down moments later, dropping ground troops outside the ruin. The squad engaged them in fierce firefights among the swirling dust and flickering lightning. Arya's telekinetic bursts deflected energy bolts, and she used her martial prowess to incapacitate several raiders. Hayes coordinated the turret placements, weaving between cover to keep the group's defensive perimeter from collapsing. Though they fought bravely, the Corvians had superior numbers. Soon, Arya found herself pushing deeper into the ruin with Hayes, trying to hold a choke point so that the rest of the team could set up fallback positions. She conjured a shimmering barrier of kinetic force to block a barrage of enemy fire, sweat beading on her brow. Meanwhile, Hayes took precise shots with his rifle, covering her flank. Between pulses of raw adrenaline, she spared him a glance. They were fighting in tandem, their movements oddly synchronized. A corner of her mind acknowledged that she trusted him, more than she would have guessed possible. After all the friction, it surprised her to realize how naturally they worked together when life and death hung in the balance. Then, a fresh wave of Corvians stormed the corridor, forcing them to retreat further into a side chamber. Arya gasped as the barrier weakened. The strain on her mind was immense, her telekinetic reserves draining fast. Hayes, noticing her faltering, stepped forward, physically shielding her from a flurry of blasts. His body jerked slightly as a near miss singed the shoulder of his uniform. She seized a moment of focus to unleash a shockwave that hurled several Corvians against the walls, leaving them dazed. That gave them time to slam the doors shut, jamming them with a piece of debris. The two of them stood in the flickering emergency lights, panting. She turned to him, noticing the singe on his sleeve and the scorched patch of skin beneath. "You're hurt," she said, pressing a palm lightly to the area. He winced but shook his head. "Just a graze. We've got bigger problems. They're not going to stop until they get the relic, and I doubt we can hold them off forever." Her expression grim, she nodded. "I can sense the device's energy in the central chamber. It's more active now, feeding off the storm's power. If the Corvians seize it, they might weaponize it. Then we destroy it," he said without hesitation. She felt a pang of conflict. The technology in question was the kind of artifact her people revered. She had been raised to see such relics as the birthright of the Valorians. Yet, in this moment, the danger was clear. "Yes," she murmured, "we destroy it." They found the device glowing brighter than ever, pulses of light dancing along the crystal rods. The floor trembled, a swirl of dust swirling in arcs above the dais. Arya knelt beside it, trying to recall the method they had used before to stabilize it. Hayes rummaged through a kit of explosives, setting them for a controlled demolition. Before they could finish, the door behind them blasted open, sending chunks of stone flying. Corvian raiders charged in. Arya leaped up, launching another telekinetic wave, though it was weaker than before. Hayes fired methodically, dropping two of them, but more poured in. One lunged at Arya, forcing her to twist away from a jagged blade. She pivoted, landed a kick that sent him sprawling. But even as she fought, she saw Hayes grappling with another raider, the two rolling across the floor. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, an explosion reverberated from outside, shaking the ruin. Hayes's eyes flicked to Arya's. She realized it was the rest of their squad, probably triggering the fallback plan. The sudden quake caused a partial collapse, burying some of the Corvians. The few that remained retreated to avoid being crushed by falling debris. Arya took the chance to rush to Hayes's side, pulling him free from the bits of rubble that had pelted them. The device's glow began to spike, as if it was about to release another seismic shock. "We have to do this now," Hayes growled. He pressed the explosive charges around the dais, quickly linking them to a remote trigger. "Get to cover!" She hesitated, mind racing. Destroying the device meant forfeiting something her people valued, but she knew the stakes. "All right," she said softly. "Let's go." They sprinted back down the corridor, avoiding more falling stones, until they reached an outer chamber that was somewhat stable. Arya nodded. Hayes activated the remote. A thunderous roar echoed through the ruin, and a wave of dust plumed out. The floor rocked violently, then settled into an ominous silence. The device was gone, buried under tons of collapsed stone. They emerged into the open air, battered but alive, joining the remainder of their squad. The Corvians, having suffered significant losses and failing to secure the relic, withdrew in their ships. Soon after, a rescue craft from Silver Dawn Station arrived, braving the storm to pull the squad out. The entire ruin lay in shambles, effectively preventing any further tampering by outside forces. Arya sat on the rescue shuttle's bench, shoulders slumped in an uncharacteristic show of exhaustion. Hayes sat across from her, his injury bandaged by a field medic. Their eyes met, a fleeting exchange that held a measure of understanding. She gave a nod. He returned it. No words were needed to convey what they had just accomplished. Back at the station, the aftermath played out in hurried medical checks, debriefings, and maintenance. Arya's left arm was bruised, her mind fatigued from overuse of telekinetic powers. Hayes had a second-degree burn from that near-miss blast. Despite it all, they each insisted on verifying that the other was stable before retiring to their respective quarters. A day later, Arya stood near a panoramic window overlooking the swirling planet below, her reflection tinted with the station's overhead lighting. She had received word that the Valorian Council would be displeased about the destruction of the relic, but that the Alliance itself commended her and Hayes for preventing a catastrophic outcome. She tried to feel sorrow over the lost artifact. Instead, she felt relief. Perhaps the first time in her life she allowed her personal instincts to overrule the dogma instilled in her from birth. Soft footsteps approached. She turned to see Hayes, his right arm in a sling, crossing the threshold into the observation deck. She let her posture straighten, but this time there was no haughty tilt to her chin. She merely watched as he came to stand beside her, gazing out at the planet's storm. "They say the Corvians won't be back," he remarked. "Not after what we did, at least not any time soon." She inclined her head. "Perhaps we stopped them. For now." He studied her face in the reflection of the glass. "How are you holding up?" She let out a quiet breath. "Better than expected. Your superiors are quite generous in their praise. Mine are a bit less so." He grunted. "I figured. Sorry you have to deal with that." A small half-smile curved her lips. "Don't be. I made a choice. I would do it again if needed." He nodded. Silence reigned a moment, broken only by the hum of the station. Then, unprompted, she turned to face him, stepping closer. She lifted a hand, pressing it to the front of his jacket, feeling the battered edge of the sling around his arm. "Thank you," she said, voice soft. "For everything." He searched her expression, as if unsure of her intent. "We're a team," he replied simply. Those words made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not neatly classify. Some odd mixture of admiration, gratitude, and a remaining flicker of friction that made her pulse spike. She recalled vividly that confrontation in the corridor, the moment he'd pinned her to the wall. Here and now, the memory no longer provoked anger. Instead, it left her slightly breathless. She glanced at the corridor behind them, ensuring they were alone. In a fluid motion, she took a single step that guided him backward, pressing him gently against the paneled wall. Her forearm rested lightly along his uninjured shoulder. His eyes widened just a fraction. "Arya," her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "I said never to touch me that way again. But perhaps, in some cases, I can make an exception." A faint hint of humor played on his lips, overshadowed by an undercurrent of tension. "Is that right?" She nodded, leaning in. Her hair fell forward around her face, silver eyes locked on his. Beneath the strong lights of the observation deck, her complexion glowed, accentuating the faint glimmer in her skin that had always identified her as Valorian nobility. She spoke again, more quietly. "You pinned me to that wall. I've not been able to forget it. You forced me to face my own stubborn pride, and even though I hated it at first, I realize now I needed that." His good hand came up, gently resting against her waist. "I wouldn't have done it if I had any other choice." She allowed herself a slight, knowing smile, and if I told you to do it again, a breath of laughter escaped him. "I might ask if we could settle for something a little less adversarial." Her eyes gleamed. "Perhaps. But you must not stop challenging me, Lucas Hayes. My people believed me untouchable. Now I want to see what else this galaxy has in store." His voice softened. "Then let's find out together." She closed the gap between them, and in the hush of that moment the tension that had once been pure animosity melted into a different kind of electricity. Her lips brushed his, tentative at first, then more certain when he responded. The embrace lasted a few seconds, a stolen fragment of intimacy on a station filled with soldiers, scientists, and the lingering echoes of conflict. When they separated, they remained close, foreheads nearly touching. She could feel his heart hammering against her forearm where it rested near his chest. He looked at her with a mixture of caution and invitation. "Is this acceptable for a Valorian aristocrat?" he asked gently. She let out a breathy laugh. "It will cause a stir, no doubt, but you have proven yourself worthy of far more than I ever gave humans credit for." Her expression turned serious. "I may have to return to Valoria soon. My clan will need a full report on the events here." He nodded. "And I'll likely stay, at least for a while, given everything that needs repairing after the Corvian skirmish." She touched the edge of his collar. "Then we'll part ways for now, but I suspect our paths will cross again. The galaxy isn't so large for me to avoid you forever." He brushed a thumb over her cheek, smudging away a trace of dust left from the recent battles. "I'll look forward to that day." She stepped back, giving him space, her posture still regal but now carrying an unexpected warmth. "Take care of yourself, Hayes." "You too," he replied, that half-smile returning. "Arya." She turned and left the observation deck, each step echoing in the corridor. As she walked, she felt a new lightness in her chest, the bitterness, the arrogance. Perhaps it had not vanished entirely, but it was tempered by something new she couldn't quite name. She pictured the faces of her clan back home, the shock they would feel upon learning she had cooperated so closely with a human, gone so far as to destroy a revered artifact for the greater good. She closed her eyes, exhaling. She would stand by that choice. In the days that followed, official commendations were issued. Arya received a medal from the station's commander. In the awarding ceremony, her name was spoken alongside Lucas Hayes's. The rest of the recruits gave her respectful nods now, not out of fear or forced reverence, but genuine recognition of her skill and sacrifice. For the first time, she realized that such honest respect could feel more satisfying than the forced deference she had expected from lesser beings. At last, the day came for Arya to depart. She was scheduled to board a Valorian transport. For hours, she debated whether to seek out Hayes for a final goodbye. In the end, she chose to find him near the docking ring, where he was helping coordinate cargo deliveries for the engineering teams. He wore the same calm expression, though she thought she detected a hint of regret in his eyes when he turned to see her approach. "You're leaving?" he asked, glancing at the schedule on his wrist console. She nodded. "Yes, the transport is waiting. I've been told that my presence is requested at once on Valoria." He set aside the cargo manifest and faced her fully. "I guess this is farewell then." "Temporary farewell," she corrected, raising one brow. "Unless your stubbornness has caused you to forget we have unfinished matters to attend to." He chuckled softly. "I'll keep that in mind." Without warning, she stepped forward. They were in a less private area now, with a few other personnel nearby, but she didn't seem to care. She leaned in, pressing her lips softly to his. If any of the bystanders gawked, she paid them no attention. When she drew back, she let her eyes linger on his, searching for that spark she had grown strangely fond of. "Farewell, Lucas Hayes," she said with a final nod, her voice quiet. "Thank you for everything." He stood there for a few seconds, watching as she turned and walked to the boarding tube. Before disappearing into the transport's hatch, she tossed him a small metal token. He caught it, turning it over in his hand. It was a fragment of that ancient device, still etched with strange runic patterns. She had kept it as a keepsake, apparently. Now it was his to hold, a memory of what they had done together. Long after the transport was gone, he stood on the docking platform, staring at the little token. He thought about her brash entry into his life, the friction, the fights, the grudging cooperation that had evolved into respect, and something more potent that had flickered between them in the final days. A quiet, insistent voice in the back of his mind told him their paths would indeed converge again. The galaxy's corridors, star lanes, and cosmic wonders might be vast, but certain connections could not be severed by distance alone. Arya, meanwhile, sat in her seat on the Valorian transport, ignoring the stares of her fellow Valorian passengers. She fingered the edge of her own uniform jacket where she had pinned a small patch with the emblem of Silver Dawn Station. Thoughts of the station's corridors, the swirling dust storms, and Hayes' unyielding gaze drifted through her mind. Every recollection of him, particularly the memory of him pinning her to the wall, lit a small flame in her chest. It was a challenge, a spark that continued to smolder. She had always believed herself beyond the reach of lesser beings, untouchable. She had carried that belief like armor, but now she knew that sometimes the greatest strength was found in the willingness to embrace unexpected alliances. Sometimes being touched, being held in check, could force one to confront truths they'd rather deny. The transport engines roared to life, lifting away from the docking ring. As Arya gazed through the window at the diminishing shape of Silver Dawn Station, she allowed herself a rare, gentle smile. She wondered how long it would take her to settle affairs on Valoria before some new excuse to return would arise. Perhaps it would be an official reason, more training, a summit, a special mission. Or perhaps she would simply appear at Silver Dawn one day, unannounced, to see if Lieutenant Lucas Hayes could still meet her gaze with that same unflinching resolve. Until that day, she would hold her memories close, her illusions of superiority shattered in the most unexpected and transformative way. She had once believed her elevated status would protect her from all lesser contact, that her pride was reason enough to stand alone. Then a human came along, pinned her against a wall, and in so doing, set her on a path to become something greater than she ever imagined. The faint tingle of possibility lingered in her fingertips, reminding her that not all relics worth discovering lay buried beneath centuries of dust. Sometimes they were found in the shared spark between two people who refused to let differences define them. She closed her eyes. The transport soared off into the darkness of space, carrying her toward whatever came next. Yet she knew that a part of her remained behind, anchored in that station, in those corridors, in the memory of a human who dared to touch what she'd always believed untouchable. And for once, she was grateful that he had. Soth Arvel stood on a wide balcony overlooking the city of Mirioni, capital of the beleaguered planet Zalias. It was once a place of winding canals, rose-hued stone towers, and swirling, glittering spires that reflected the twin suns in pastel colors. Now, a harsh gray haze clung to every rooftop and street. An alarm bell droned somewhere far off in the distance, signaling another wave of toxic storms gathering above the atmosphere. This was the third time today that the alarms had sounded, and Sart's heart sank deeper each time. He was an official envoy, a young diplomat of the Zalian people, tasked with one impossible mission: to secure help for his dying world. Over the past month, Sarth had broadcast messages to every corner of the Galactic Union, from the ancient Zenrati Empire to the mercantile consortia of Vor and the proud but isolationist Shreld Collective. The same heartbreak repeated itself, over and over. Polite refusals, flowery condolences, or infuriating silence. There were faint promises of committees and research boards, statements about subsections in the Union's legal code that forbade direct intervention in certain naturally occurring phenomena. Sarth knew there was nothing natural about how quickly the cosmic storms had devastated their atmosphere. Zalias' scientists believed the storms might have originated from a collapsed star in the outer reaches of their system, but they lacked the advanced technology to confirm such theories. Around him, Mirioni teetered on the edge of panic. Nearly half its citizens had retreated underground or into sealed complexes, reliant on rapidly dwindling oxygen stores. The planet's once celebrated art scene, famous for elaborate glass sculptures and radiant living murals, had gone silent. Factories had been hastily converted into emergency filtration plants, though these patchwork machines barely made a dent in the toxins swirling through the upper layers. If the toxic levels rose even slightly more, Zalias would become uninhabitable on the surface. Already, Entire regions were no-go zones without a full environmental suit. He felt a buzz from the comm unit strapped to his wrist. It was the council hall summoning him back. Taking a last, painful breath of sour air through his filtration mask, Sarth headed downstairs, trying not to show his despair to the people who passed him in the corridors. They looked at him with weary eyes, as if to say, "You are our voice. Return with better news." At the council hall, representatives from various sectors of Zalius were gathered. Thera Meraxa, an elder stateswoman with bright turquoise patterns across her cheeks, a sign of high social standing, met his gaze anxiously. She had been a celebrated performer in her youth and even now tried to keep morale high by singing the old songs. "Any further word from the last wave of transmissions?" she asked. He shook his head. "Only polite regrets or requests for more time, but we have no more time." Governor Raynar, head of Zalius's provisional crisis government, approached with heavy steps. The stress weighed on him. The translucent frills that normally signified health had turned a dull grayish shade on his temples. "Sarth," he said, voice tight, "we've gotten word that the Zenrati specifically invoked the non-interference clause. They claim these storms are cosmically ordained and that to intervene might upset some delicate cosmic balance." Sarth's anger flared, but he tried to keep his composure. "Cowards," he muttered. "They have entire fleets capable of atmospheric engineering. One volley of their terraforming satellites could stabilize our outer environment in days, maybe less." "They won't send them," Governor Raynar replied bleakly. "They refuse, citing cost, risk, and a half-dozen legal precedents." Sereth Arvel bowed his head. "Then, perhaps it's time to speak before the Galactic Union one last time. Maybe I can shame them into action." Across the city, the horns sounded again. A swirling band of rust-colored clouds loomed in the sky, drifting closer. It was known as a cosmic storm, but to the people it was simply known as the Reaper's Veil. Once it settled over an area, the oxygen levels plummeted and any unprotected life perished within hours. Sarth glanced up, dread clawing at his insides. If no help arrived soon, all of Zalias would drown in that poisonous haze. He left for the main spaceport at Mariani's Edge, boarding a battered diplomatic shuttle. There was no time for formalities. As the shuttle rose through the choking atmosphere, he peered down at the mosaic of domed cities and patchwork farmland that once fed countless families. The farmland was withering, the open canals had dried to cracked stone, and the shimmering spires were coated in ash. This was not the Zalias he had known as a child, chasing sunlit fish along the canals. The heartbreak was suffocating. On the day Sarth arrived at the Galactic Union Council, an imposing space station in neutral territory, he felt more trepidation than he'd ever known. The station was a marvel of engineering, a massive ring structure rotating gently to create artificial gravity within. The council chamber itself was a grand dome of transparent alloys, revealing the stars beyond. Delegates from over 100 species convened in spherical pods that floated in precise arcs. The architecture was regal, but Sarth was in no mood to admire it. He took his place at the petitioner's podium. In front of him, the half-circle of presiding counselors glowed with multicolored lights that indicated which species were present. The Zenrati representative, tall and elongated with glimmering scales, regarded him through narrow, unblinking eyes. The Shreln delegate, half obscured within a swirling environment of methane, typed notes into a console. Many others were present, each inside specialized climate pods, separated from each other's biology. Sarth inhaled through a small translator device. "Honorable members of the Galactic Union," he began, "I stand before you once more as a representative of Zalias. We have transmitted all our data regarding the cosmic storms that are crippling our planet. In the last 3 days alone, nearly 10,000 of our citizens have died due to the rising toxicity. Our scientists predict complete atmospheric collapse within weeks." The Zenrati counselor, Karal Nice, flicked a scaly crest. "We have reviewed your latest data," he intoned. but it remains uncertain whether these storms are a purely natural phenomenon. The non-interference clause. Natural, Sarth's voice rose. We are dying. Our children are dying. There is nothing natural about letting an entire civilization suffocate when you have technology that can save us. Murmurs spread across the chamber. The Shrelnelgit coughed in annoyance, or perhaps in fear of Sarth's emotional tone. Another species, the Valtori, who resembled large insectoid forms, clacked their mandibles. Finally, an elder counselor from the Vril collective turned on his hoverchair. We sympathize, but the council requires deeper investigation. We propose a subcommittee to study potential interventions. Meanwhile, your people could attempt partial evacuation of cultural or scientific elite, as the Drakon Consortium recommended. Partial, Sarth said incredulously. We have billions of lives at stake, and you suggest saving a handful? It is the best we can offer for now, the Vril replied. Sarth shook with fury. This was the same hollow refrain he had heard dozens of times. Regrets, rules, resource constraints, subcommittees. All the while, Zalius sank deeper into ruin. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a small figure wearing a human uniform, sitting quietly in an observer's section. The face was unreadable, but it was the only human present. Sarth had heard humans join the Union only a few decades ago. Their seat was non-permanent, their sway had no illusions that one unseasoned human ambassador could overturn the council's apathy. After the hearing, he confronted the leading counselors in the corridor, trying to rally any shred of compassion. Instead, he received polite nods and vague half-promises. We will continue to review. We must respect established guidelines. Your data is inconclusive, and so forth. His patience cracked. You're condemning us to death, he snarled. May history remember how the mighty Union looked away when an entire planet begged for help. He stormed off, ignoring calls to calm himself. In the corridor, he passed the human ambassador, who offered him a sad, apologetic smile. Sarth was too furious to respond, so he spun away and caught the next shuttle back to Zalius. On the flight home, he gazed out the window. The glow of starlight reminded him that, out there, entire civilizations had decided his people weren't worth their time. He landed in Marioni, half expecting to see bodies in the streets. Fortunately, the filtration system was still managing to keep toxins at bay for the center of the city. Word of his mission's failure spread fast. People wept or sank into silent resignation. The cosmic storms churned across the horizon, creeping steadily closer. There was nothing left to do but watch. Then, 3 days after he returned, a frantic comm technician burst into the council hall. We're receiving an incoming signal from an unknown fleet, she said. They're requesting permission to enter orbit. Sarth looked up. Which species? Zenrati? Drakon? Are they serious this time? She tapped her console. They identify themselves as an independent relief expedition from Earth. Humans. He felt a jolt of confusion and cautious hope. Humans? Earth was widely regarded as a younger player in the Union, nowhere near the level of technology possessed by more advanced species. Why would they come when the others refused? Within hours, a formation of ships arrived in Zalius's orbit. They transmitted an open hail. This is Captain Aurora Green of the ECS Talon. We bring emergency medical supplies, environmental support systems, and a team of scientists ready to assist. Please advise on safe landing coordinates. The planet's meager defenses were scrambled, but Sarth quickly overrode them, granting permission. Uncertain and thrilled, he raced to the spaceport. Outside, the atmosphere glowed a dull red with swirling toxins, but he donned a heavy-duty respirator and braced himself. One by one, ships descended. They were not large, certainly not as imposing as the legendary Zenrati dreadnoughts or Drakon advanced transports. Some ships looked like repurposed cargo vessels, with patchwork hull plating and engine sections that seemed welded together from multiple designs. Yet for all that, these ships performed a neat landing, forming a ragtag array on the battered tarmac. Hatches hissed open. People in bulky suits emerged, each with a clear visor revealing human features of various skin tones and hair colors. Some suits had scuffed emblems reading Earth Relief 4. Others read Civic Volunteer. Sarth stepped forward, flanked by a few Zalian officials, uncertain what to expect. A figure in a dark blue environmental suit stepped forward, removing her helmet. She was fairly tall, with sharp eyes and short hair braided at the sides. "I'm Captain Aurora Green," she said, voice slightly muffled in the toxic air. "We came as soon as we could." Sarth introduced himself, and they clasped forearms. "Why, how did you get here so quickly? The council turned us away. They said there was no point." Captain Green's features hardened. "Because it's the right thing to do, council or no council. We learned of your distress calls through Ambassador Chen, who sits on the Union in an observer role. She told Earth how dire your planet's situation was. Our government decided to do what we could on our own." Behind her, more humans unloaded crates of supplies, mechanical equipment, long tubes of what looked like inflatable tents, and a variety of canisters labeled with hazard symbols. Several Zalians stared wide-eyed, uncertain whether this was salvage or advanced tech. The humans radiated urgency as they set up scanning devices. One man, with broad shoulders and thick gloves, introduced himself as Engineer Daniel Yi. Another was Dr. Elena Singh, wearing a patch reading medical spec. There was also a short, wiry man named Carl Mendez, who flicked through a holoscreen of data about the atmosphere's composition. Governor Raynar and Thera Merexa arrived as well, though their health was visibly declining. Raynar coughed into a rebreather mask. "Any chance you can do better than the rest of the galaxy?" he said hoarsely. Daniel Yi gave a lopsided grin. "We won't promise miracles, but we'll try. Earth's own environment used to face all kinds of catastrophes centuries ago. Climate disasters, pollution, you name it. We learned a thing or two about patching up a broken atmosphere." Sarth felt a stir of hope. He led the humans to an underground briefing chamber where they pored over the incomplete data that Zalian scientists had gathered about the cosmic storms. Mendez frowned at the readouts. "These storms are basically saturating your upper atmosphere with exotic particles that trigger a breakdown of oxygen molecules. Any advanced species could fix it if they devoted enough resources, but they won't, right?" "Correct," Sarth replied tersely. Captain Green exhaled. "Then we'll do it our way. Let's start with immediate measures to keep your people alive. Then we'll figure out how to push back the storms." An hour later, an emergency plan coalesced, something the humans called Operation Lifeline. It was, by high-tech standards, laughably simple. First, they would inflate large temporary domes with internal filtration systems, each dome capable of housing hundreds of Zalians in more breathable conditions. Then, they would release specialized bacteria strains that Earth had developed to tackle chemical spills back home, hoping these organisms could neutralize some of the toxins in the mid-level atmosphere. Finally, they had a small supply of medical nanites, primitive by Union standards, but potentially life-saving for Exalians suffering immediate respiratory failure. Sarth escorted them to the city outskirts, where thousands of refugees had gathered, living in tents or huddling in half-collapsed structures. Raynar began coordinating an evacuation into these new inflatable domes. The first time Sarth saw a dome being inflated, he was struck by how unremarkable it looked. Big sheets of dull, rubbery fabric, plus a series of fans and pumps that blasted air inside until it formed a sealed bubble. Hardly an elegant Zenrati force field, but the dome sealed effectively, and once the filtration unit came online, the internal environment stabilized to something near habitable. Zalian families slowly ventured in, eyes wide with relief, but for all this success the clock was ticking. While the humans and Zalians worked side by side, the cosmic storms continued to push inward from the horizon. Over the next 2 days, the atmosphere's toxicity levels rose, even as more domes sprang up across Mirioni. The streets were now mostly deserted, except for relief teams. Dr. Singh and her medical volunteers rushed from dome to dome, administering oxygen treatments and stabilizing the most vulnerable. Sometimes Sarth noticed how exhausted she looked, but she refused to stop. Late on the second night, the storms intensified. Patches of swirling pink and brown clouds tore across the sky, raining acidic droplets. Engineer Yi's team scrambled to shield the new domes with emergency tarps. In the chaos, one of the smaller domes collapsed under the deluge, and a horrifying hush fell over the site. Volunteers rushed in, hauling out semi-conscious Xalians who had inhaled toxic vapors. Sarth felt tears sting his eyes as he carried a child, the boy's chest barely moving with shallow breaths. Dr. Singh knelt, administering nanites, but her face was grave. Not all survived that night. The provisional death toll rose and morale plummeted. Some Xalians began to wonder if the human effort was futile. Humans themselves, though stoic, showed flickers of despair. They had arrived with great intentions, but the entire planet seemed determined to collapse under cosmic forces beyond their control. The next morning, Captain Green convened a meeting in the barely functioning power station of Marioni. Everyone looked haggard. "We've gotten partial success with the bacteria in the upper troposphere," reported Mendez, "but the storms are too strong. Our approach might buy a bit of time, nothing more." Sarth leaned over the console, tension knotting his shoulders. "If we can't break those storms, we'll need to evacuate. But how? You can't possibly carry billions aboard your ships." Captain Green spoke softly. "We can't. We could carry some, maybe tens of thousands crammed in, but not more," Governor Regnar hissed in frustration. "You're telling me we'll have to choose who lives and who dies?" Silence thickened in the cramped space. Then Dr. Singh cleared her throat. "Let's not jump there yet. If we could find a way to weaken the storms, or at least shield the planet's upper layers." Engineer Yi rapped his knuckles on the table. "We studied cosmic storms on Earth once. A partial solution involved creating artificial cloud layers to block harmful radiation or neutralize chemical breakdown. But we'd need a lot of water vapor, aerosols, or something akin to that. We do have engine exhaust from our fusion drives. You want to burn fuel in the sky until it forms protective clouds?" Sarth asked. "That sounds absurd." Yi shrugged. "Desperate times, friend. Sometimes the simplest method can have an outsized effect. We can coordinate flight patterns, produce a layer of particulate matter in the stratosphere, reflect or scatter some of the storm's destructive energies, and hopefully reduce the rate of atmospheric breakdown. They had little to lose. Over the ensuing days, the humans launched their ships in carefully choreographed routes, releasing controlled streams of exhaust, microscopic particulates, and water vapor. It was hardly a graceful display. Some ships, battered by the storms, had to land prematurely. Fuel reserves dwindled alarmingly fast. Yet, bit by bit, sensors on the ground showed a slight decline in the storm's destructive intensity, enough to at least slow the planetary collapse. For the first time, Sarth dared to think they might have a chance. Yes, Xalius was still in crisis, but there was a glimmer of hope. Even the battered remains of the city took on a kind of stubborn resilience. People began assisting the humans, erecting more domes, patching leaks, distributing meager rations. Thera Merexa organized small concerts inside the largest dome, singing sorrowful lullabies that reminded everyone of the planet's once vibrant culture. The humans watched, some with tears in their eyes, others with a fierce determination. Their efforts seemed to be paying off. Toxic levels in certain regions dropped, if only by a small percentage. But in the midst of that tentative progress, Sarth received an urgent call from the Xalian Geoscience Department. The voice on the line was frantic. "We've just run a scan with the humans' orbital sensors. There's a massive chain of fissures forming along the eastern continent. Seismic readings are spiking. We could be facing catastrophic earthquakes." Earthquakes were nearly unheard of on Xalius. The planet's tectonic activity had always been minimal, but the cosmic storms, or some other planetary reaction, now threatened to tear the land apart. If that happened, the fragile domes would be destroyed and any life outside would be directly exposed to lethal toxins. The humans had stabilized the sky just enough to buy time, and now the ground itself seemed ready to rebel. Within hours, a full crisis alert sounded across Marioni. Captain Green led a hurried conference in the main dome, Geoscientists pointed to projected quake epicenters, all converging on the heart of the eastern continent where millions of Xalians still resided. Engineer Yi grimaced at the data. If these quakes happen at once, it'll be like fracturing the entire plate. We could see rifts open, vents releasing even more toxins from below. Governor Renier put his head in his hands. All your work will be for nothing if the surface splits. Maybe we have to attempt a partial evacuation. He said the words as if they were acid. Captain Green's expression was grim. If we start loading up refugees, we can probably save thousands, tens of thousands at most, but the rest would be doomed, and we'd have to dismantle a lot of the equipment to make room, which means the planet definitely won't be saved. Daniel Yi looked up, eyes narrowed. Unless we do something about the tectonic pressure. He glanced at Carl Mendez, who was scanning a geological model. Carl, you remember that old concept about controlled detonation to release tension gradually? Mendez nodded. It's risky as hell, but we studied something like it back on Earth for supervolcano mitigation. If you drill into strategic fault lines, place shaped explosives, you might force smaller quakes in a controlled sequence instead of one massive quake. Sarth gave them a wide-eyed stare. You're talking about setting off bombs in the crust of my planet? Yi exhaled. Only small bombs, carefully calculated. Better to have dozens of moderate tremors than one catastrophic rip that kills everyone. We'd need to coordinate with your geoscientists to figure out exactly where to drill. The entire chamber erupted in protests, alarm, and fear. But once the panic subsided, logic remained. Do nothing and the quake might destroy all hope. Attempt partial evacuation and doom billions. Or attempt something unprecedented, blasting the fault lines in a desperate effort to stave off the apocalypse. Sarth rubbed his temples. Let's do it, he said quietly. If you believe there's even a chance. The planet erupted into frantic motion. Human engineers and Xalian volunteers formed drilling teams, setting out to the eastern continent. The air was still borderline toxic, so everyone wore suits, traveling in convoys of battered ground vehicles. They carried specialized charges, small but potent warheads that needed to be placed kilometers below the surface. Meanwhile, those who stayed behind in Marione worked to reinforce the domes with scavenged materials. Metal support rods, hull plating from one of the human cargo ships, even improvised shock absorbers formed from a mixture of resin and local clay. Days bled into nights. Crews took shifts around the clock, with many near collapse from exhaustion. More cosmic storms battered the artificial cloud shield, but the humans kept adjusting flight paths and fueling a few ships with the last reserves. Sarth accompanied a drilling team at one of the smaller fissures. He watched in awe as Daniel Yi led the group, calibrating scanners and forging a path down into the sweltering underground. The air reeked of sulfur, and every step threatened to crumble the earthen walls. They placed explosives with excruciating care, each one labeled with a position ID that matched a geoscience model. Late on the third day, everything was in position. The charges were linked, ready for synchronized detonation. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Captain Green's voice crackled over comm channels. We'll activate the sequence in 60 seconds. Everyone stand by. This is our best shot. Inside a half-collapsed building, Sarth and others crouched by a console. The tension was agonizing. The countdown ticked away. When it reached 0, a faint rumble swept beneath their feet, crescendoing into a roar. Walls trembled. People clung to each other, suits scraping across rubble. For a harrowing minute, it seemed like the plan had failed, that the entire plate might tear free. Then the vibration settled. The ground continued to quake, but in smaller waves rather than one colossal rupture. Across the eastern continent, sensors reported a controlled series of moderate quakes. Buildings cracked, domes shuddered, but there was no cataclysmic fault ripping the planet to pieces. Dust choked the air, comm signals erupted with frantic voices, but an hour later the verdict arrived. The worst quake had been averted. The newly created fissures vented built-up pressure slowly, allowing the planet's crust to stabilize. Huge cracks and localized disasters still occurred, and many were injured or killed, but not the billions that might have died. Operation Lifeline had bought Zalia's precious time. It was victory, though a fragile one. As Sarth surveyed the battered city from a vantage point, he saw flickers of hope stirring among the populace. The cosmic storms still raged, but at a slightly more manageable pace now that the humans had seeded the skies with their improvised cloud formations. People still relied on the domes or portable respirators, but at least they had a chance to survive while the planet's atmosphere underwent slow, painstaking repair. In the days that followed, the humans deployed an updated strain of their bacteria, modified to survive in the shifting climate that was partly contaminated by volcanic-like gases from the fissures. Dr. Mendez oversaw these changes, working with Zayan scientists in cramped, low-tech labs. The intangible line between crude human engineering and high-level brilliance blurred. Once again, the plan was to break down the toxins, but with these specialized microorganisms tough enough to endure new extremes. Little by little, data from atmospheric probes showed a slow decline in overall toxicity. A meager 2% improvement the first week, then 5%, then 8%. It was not enough to let everyone breathe normally, but enough to prevent daily mass casualties. The dome expansions eased. The medical teams found some respite. The planet might not be truly livable for months, maybe years, but Zalius was moving away from the brink of total annihilation. Sarth began to see signs of life returning. In the earliest hours of dawn, stray patches of sky took on a faint turquoise hue, reminiscent of the old days. A wave of unexpected arrivals appeared in orbit one morning, ships bearing the insignia of the Galactic Union. They landed in official splendor, with delegates stepping forth in shimmering regalia. Sarth felt raw fury coil in his stomach at how neatly they walked across the battered tarmac, cameras whirring to capture every angle. They had come far too late. The official leading them was the Vril elder from the council. He gave a speech about the Union's regret over the tragedy that has befallen the Exialian people, and how they now stood ready to discuss terms of assistance. Sarth had to keep his temper in check. Captain Green and her officers also remained diplomatic, though the tension was palpable. At a brief press conference, the Union delegates praised the noble efforts made by the humans, then pivoted to highlight how it was always in the Council's plan to help Zalius once certain legalities were resolved. No one believed them, but the cameras rolled anyway. Sarth could barely stand to watch. Instead, he focused on helping volunteers remove older domes and free up some open areas for repairs. The storms were calmer now, but still raging in some distant sectors. People needed real help, not photo ops. Afterwards, Sarth and Captain Green walked side by side through a makeshift marketplace that had sprung up under a large transparent canopy. Some Zalian merchants sold simple foods, grown hydroponically in purified water. Humans browsed with curiosity, offering small trade items or earth delicacies in exchange. It was an odd pocket of normalcy amid disaster. Sarth turned to Captain Green. "I need to ask, truly, why you did all this. Your people risked everything. You burned through resources. You arrived without official Union sanction. You've lost men and women in the line of duty for what?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Back on Earth, we faced our share of crises over the centuries. Climate upheavals, environmental collapse. We learned that if we want to call ourselves civilized, we can't just watch others perish. We remember the bitterness of being left to our fate, or having to fight on our own to solve our world's catastrophes. So when we heard your planet was on the brink, we couldn't ignore it. As for cost or risk, well, sometimes you don't wait for perfect solutions. You just show up." Sarth felt tears gather at the corners of his eyes. He extended a trembling hand, which the captain clasped. "Zalius owes you a debt we can never repay. Thank you." She offered a gentle smile. "No debt, Sarth. Just do the same if you ever see someone else left behind." News traveled across the galaxy about how the humans had rescued Zalius. Some species responded with surprise, others reacted with faint embarrassment, as if they realized they could have done the same. The council delegates came and went, drafting belated rescue proposals that only seemed relevant now that the worst was over. The Xalians greeted them with polite civility but saved their true gratitude for those who had arrived first. Over the next few weeks, the cosmic storms began to abate. The artificial particulate layer in the upper atmosphere worked well enough to let the bacterial strains flourish, and a cycle of slow restoration took shape. Dr. Singh reported a decrease in new respiratory cases, and for the first time in months, the daily death toll dropped to single digits. People started emerging from the domes for short periods, wearing simplified respirators. There were still tragedies. Quakes in remote areas trapped entire towns under rubble before rescue teams could arrive. Storm pockets ravaged farmland, but each day was slightly more hopeful than the last. Sarth spent his time coordinating with Captain Green on logistics, deciding which ships should remain in orbit to assist with final atmospheric support runs, how to expand medical care to outlying regions, and so on. One evening, close to dusk, Sarth joined Governor Renar, Thera Merexa, and the human leadership on a high platform that overlooked the battered skyline. The cosmic storms had receded enough that one could see threads of pale turquoise in the upper sky. It wasn't the pristine beauty of old Xalius, but it was far more promising than the apocalyptic gloom from before. Thera Merexa began to hum an old lullaby, her voice resonating softly in the still, heavy air. The humans listened with silent respect. Even the battered spires and half-collapsed towers seemed to gather around this gentle moment of reprieve. Captain Green watched the horizon. "Tomorrow we'll begin sending some of our ships back to Earth for refueling and resupply," she said. "We'll leave a contingent here to keep aiding your reconstruction. If all goes well, Xalius won't need outside help in a matter of months. Or at least you'll be stable enough to rebuild on your own terms." Sarth exhaled slowly, letting the mix of relief and sadness wash over him. "I wish you could stay longer," he admitted. "We've only begun to restore life, and there's still so much to do. Our environment is fragile, and so is our social fabric. We lost entire generations of knowledge in these storms, but I understand. You've done more than anyone else. You deserve to go home, and we'll be forever grateful." Green placed a reassuring hand on Sarth's shoulder. "We'll stay as long as we can, just not in full force. But you'll manage. You Xalians are stronger than you know." Night fell slowly. Despite the toxins still clinging in pockets, the sky had scattered glimmers of starlight. For the first time in months, Sarth could see them clearly through the thinning haze. He recalled how he'd once looked at those same stars and felt only despair. Now there was a sense that Xalius could exist among them, not as a doomed footnote, but as a living, breathing planet that overcame a cosmic onslaught with the help of new friends. In the coming days, the Union's official oversight teams busied themselves taking notes, collecting samples, praising how well the atmosphere was recovering. They murmured about how the Council would have certainly intervened soon if the humans hadn't stepped in prematurely. No one believed them, but no one openly challenged it either. Xalius's leadership took the stance that it no longer mattered who got the credit. Their people were alive. That was enough. Still, countless Xalians privately vowed never to forget who truly saved them. The presence of the Earth Relief Expedition was written into the planet's annals. Local artists began carving new sculptures in the shape of ships that bore patchwork designs capturing that unmistakably human style. Children in the dome schools were taught that, in their darkest hour, it was not the oldest or most advanced civilization that answered the call, but one that remembered what it meant to struggle and refused to stand by. On the final day before half of the Earth fleet departed, Sarth arranged a small farewell ceremony in what used to be a grand amphitheater in the center of Mirioni. The structure was still damaged, so only part of it was usable, but a few hundred humans and Xalians gathered to share a meal, exchange gifts, and offer thanks. A battered piano-like instrument salvaged from a collapsed museum was tuned as best as possible, and Thera Merexa sang a haunting duet with one of the human engineers who happened to be a talented violinist. In a brief address, Captain Aurora Green spoke to the crowd. We humans are far from perfect, but we know that leaving a planet to die when we have the means to help is never acceptable. Xalias deserved a fighting chance, and we're humbled that you allowed us to join you in that fight." When the time came for the ECS Talon and several companion vessels to lift off, many Xalias lined the roads, wearing protective suits and waving banners of gratitude. Sarth stood near the main dome, watching the ships ignite their engines and arc upwards. The once contaminated skies parted for them. He could imagine a future in which Xalias's air would be clean enough that no one would need those suits to stand and wave. And that future existed because a group of humans, scrappy, resourceful, and impossibly stubborn, had arrived with no promise of reward and no council mandate. Shortly after the ships vanished into the heavens, Sarth finally allowed himself to cry. They were tears of relief, grief for the dead, and wonder at how strangers from a distant star could become saviors. Steadying himself, he glanced at his wristcom, which displayed updated atmospheric readings. A 2% improvement that day, a slow but steady climb. There were still many crises ahead, but at least they had tomorrow. In the months that followed, Xalias repaired her wounds with dogged persistence. Rifts left by the quakes were stabilized, farmland was reseeded with the humans' assistance, and a handful of Earth scientists remained on the planet to oversee further environmental engineering. Although the storms continued in pockets across remote regions, they were weaker and less frequent, gradually diminishing. The inflatable domes were replaced by sturdier structures. Small, incremental steps toward revival. The Union Council, for its part, dispatched official teams who arrived with advanced scanners, too late to save the day, but eager to document the phenomenon. Some tried to reframe the narrative, painting the Council as having always planned to step in. Others quietly admitted that the humans had forced their hand. Either way, it was now widely known that Earth had done what centuries-old civilizations refused to do. Sarth worked closely with the human advisors who stayed behind, forging a lasting bond between the two peoples. Night after night, he'd walk through the battered streets of Marioni, watching neon lights flicker back to life, listening to the hum of newly repaired water purifiers. Always, he reminded himself how close they'd come to losing everything. He often recalled the day he met Aurora Green on the toxic tarmac. That day when he dared to hope that someone, anyone, would intervene. When Xalias finally declared its environment stable enough for people to step outside with minimal breathing gear, a modest celebration ensued. Though the air was still not as pure as it had once been, children could run short distances without risking immediate poisoning. In the city squares, improvisational concerts sprang up, echoing those that once defined Xalian culture. Muralists turned the new domes into canvases of swirling color. The humans joined in these festivities, dancing awkwardly to alien music they only half understood. One dusk, while looking at the horizon, Sarth caught sight of what remained of the cosmic storms. In the distance, dark, roiling clouds still flickered with strange electric charges, yet they no longer seemed invincible. They were like a wounded beast, reeling from a blow they never expected. Over the comm, Dr. Mendez updated him that the improved bacterial strains continued to work wonders. Sarth closed his eyes, letting relief settle into his bones. They had not only survived, but set a path to real recovery. News reports trickled in from across the galaxy. Some hailed humans as improbable heroes of the modern era. Others labeled them reckless upstarts meddling in cosmic events. But for Xalias, the question was settled. Their gratitude for Earth was boundless. No official Union treaties or labyrinthine codes could stand in the way of what they had experienced firsthand: compassion, extended without expectation. Finally, one early morning, Captain Aurora Green returned with a second wave of Earthships, carrying more supplies and new specialists. She joked about how Earth was learning from the entire fiasco, refining their technology for future crises. Sarth greeted her with a bright smile. "Welcome back," he said. "We owe you so many thanks that I've lost count." Green shook her head. "You owe us nothing. Your people have done the real work, rebuilding your world. We just showed up with some tools and refused to leave." Sarth walked with her through the city, pointing out how certain buildings had been salvaged or rebuilt. They passed a towering sculpture that Xalian artists had erected to honor those who fell in the storms and to honor the humans who had saved those left alive. The sculpture depicted two figures, one Xalian and one human, arms raised to hold aloft a planet half-shrouded in swirling shapes, symbolizing the storms. Around them were smaller shapes representing life's fragility. It was a testament of solidarity and an acknowledgement that, in the vast galaxies, empathy mattered more than advanced weapons or wealth. That evening, under a calmer sky, Sarth hosted a gathering in a newly refurbished hall. He stood before a crowd of Xalians and humans, telling them how, not long ago, he had believed no one would come, that Xalius was left to die. He had watched the greatest civilizations turn a blind eye. Then these earnest, rough-around-the-hedges travelers from Earth arrived, uninvited, but wholeheartedly welcome. Applause echoed, and a few tears were shed among both species. As the hall quieted, Captain Green rose and spoke softly. In the darkest times, sometimes all it takes is one spark to keep hope alive. My crew and I came here expecting to help, but in many ways we found ourselves inspired, because you Xalians never gave up, even when abandoned. You still fought with every resource you had, every last breath. We just added a push. In that moment, Sarth felt the weight of everything that had happened. The heartbreak, the triumph, the countless nights of anxiety, the waves of cosmic storms, and the gamble with explosives to avert a planet-shattering quake. The magnitude of survival overshadowed all else. Quietly, he promised he would never stop spreading this story across the galaxy, so that other worlds might remember that help can come from the most unexpected of places. Perhaps the next time an overlooked planet reached out, more than just humans would answer. Much later, in the hush of night, Sarth stood alone on a vantage point overlooking Merione's center. The remnants of cosmic storms glowed faintly in the distant atmosphere like scar tissue on the sky, but overhead he saw genuine stars twinkling. He breathed in cautiously, feeling the new air filters in his respirator hum gently, and allowed a hint of a smile. Somewhere out there, Captain Green's people were plotting more supply runs, or maybe heading back to Earth to celebrate that they had proven the Galactic Union's cynics wrong. Xalius was not a lost cause. He thought back to the day when he first knelt before the Council, believing the entire galaxy had turned its back on them. If someone had told him then that the saviors would be humans, considered novices by most advanced species, he would have laughed at the impossibility. But impossibilities had become realities. The planet still bore deep scars, but it was breathing, growing, surviving. He pictured those battered ships descending through the toxic skies, braving storms that frightened even the mightiest empires. The memory sent a shiver of gratitude through him. In a matter of months or years, Xalius might stand as a testament to the difference between advanced aloofness and genuine compassion. Billions lived who might otherwise have perished. The Xalians who had fled underground had begun to resurface. Their famed art forms, from living murals to crystalline sculptures, were re-emerging, and overshadowing it all was the living proof that empathy could transcend politics, that an act of bold, uncalculated kindness could reshape history. Perhaps the galaxy would learn from this, perhaps not. But Xalius and Earth would remain bound, no matter how the Union tried to spin the narrative. His comm beeped, and he answered. It was Governor Raynar, sounding far more energetic than he once had. Sarth, we've got results from the new bacterial cycle. Toxin levels have fallen another 0.5% planet-wide. They say if it keeps going like this, we'll be safe enough to remove respirators outdoors in less than a year. That's wonderful, Sarth replied, a tremor in his voice. We couldn't have dared hope for such progress, and we owe it all to, Raynar began, then paused. Well, you know who. Sarth looked again at the sky, where the faint contrail of a human vessel drifted, just barely visible. Yes, he said. Yes, we do. He ended the call, letting the promise of that new future wash over him. He could almost hear Captain Green's voice in his head. Sometimes the simplest method is enough. Sometimes you just show up. Everyone else had left Zalius to die, except the humans, and that made all the difference.